I have said many times, and I will say it again, no place is safe in Gaza.
I implore the Security Council to immediately adopt a resolution that reminds parties of their obligations under international law, that calls for a ceasefire, that demands the parties allow safe and unimpeded humanitarian access.
The scale of the horror people are experiencing in Gaza is really hard to convey. People are becoming increasingly desperate as they search for food, water, and shelter amid the relentless bombing campaign that's wiping out whole families and entire neighborhoods.
A humanitarian catastrophe, while a divided Security Council simply cannot muster the consensus required to bring this conflict to heel, and denounced by an emotional Palestinian ambassador.
The General Assembly acted. The Secretary General acted. The army of his humanitarian agencies and the heroes leading them and those who are working in implementing that message acted. And there is one important body still not acting. It is you. Do what the bigger body is doing. Rise up to your responsibility and what you should do, instead of dragging the paralysis.
But emotions ran deep on both sides of the argument, with the Israeli ambassador saying he and his team intended to don a yellow Star of David until the council condemned Hamas, while echoing his prime minister that a ceasefire was out of the question.
Israel refuses to supply the enemy, Hamas, with any aid in accordance with international law. Hamas is the root cause of the situation in Gaza. Yet, you continue to insist on calling this meeting a discussion of the Palestinian question? Can anyone here provide a solution to the Palestinian question as long as Hamas controls Gaza? Calling for an immediate ceasefire is ultimately asking to tie Israel's hands and keep Hamas's rule in Gaza.
While the big powers predictably went after each other about who was doing the least.
I would like to ask the permanent representative of the USA a question. Can you explain why you oppose a ceasefire? Does this mean that the USA, as a permanent member of the Security Council, supports the doctrine of a massive retaliation in Gaza? Where is your compassion for civilians that you so eloquently express at every Security Council meeting on Ukraine? And that's even though the lives of civilians in Ukraine are far from facing the same level of threat as Palestinians in Gaza? Or is it that you only think about those who are in the European continent and that Palestinian lives don't stir any emotions in Washington?
Washington's response.
This is a typical Russian narrative that has, again, no basis in fact. Russia, frankly, has no credibility. Its prevarication knows no bounds. It claims to care about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. I think it's pretty clear. Russia doesn't care about solving crises, humanitarian crises. It creates them.
As frustration, even here, is beginning to boil over.
As we sit here in this chamber in New York, speaking to each other again and again and debating the language of our humanitarian resolution and response. An evacuation order in these conditions is cruel. It is reckless, and so is our delay as a Security Council.
All this as death and despair continues to grow in the enclave.
We can confirm that the Council is again considering a draft resolution on humanitarian pauses, the success of passage hard to predict after 4 failures. But if this is about impact on the ground, it surely won't matter much after Israel rejected all calls for a ceasefire, arguing it would only strengthen Hamas. And as a result, an international community that might now be forced to find solutions outside the strictures and constraints that UN multilateralism currently provides. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.